Well, that escalated pretty quickly. I mean, we went from checkpoint skirmishes to Israel bombing the Syrian General Staff headquarters in Damascus in like 72 hours. So, yes, Syria is once again on fire as the fighting continues to escalate across the southern portion of the country. Now, this is a very fluid, very dynamic situation. So what we're going over here is the reports as of 8:30 a.m. Central on Wednesday, July 16th, 2025. I would expect additional updates to follow here in the next couple hours. Now, we're going to run through a couple different sources to try to paint a general picture of what's happening, from the Associated Press to some freelancers on the ground. We've got Al Jazeera, Sana, Syrian state media, and then the IDF as well. So starting here with the Associated Press, they say the Syrian Observatory for Human Rights said the clashes started a couple days ago after members of the Bedouin tribe in Sweida province set up a checkpoint where they attacked and robbed a Druze man, leading to tit-for-tat attacks and kidnappings between the tribes and Druze armed groups. Government security forces deployed to the area to restore order, but were seen as taking the side of the Bedouin tribes against Druze factions. Syria's Interior Ministry said on Monday, so this report is 2 days old, that 30 people had been killed, but they have not updated that figure since. Moving back to the Syrian Observatory for Human Rights, they said as of yesterday, 166 people had been killed, including 5 women and 2 children, and it gets pretty nasty. This is not just a matter of armed groups fighting against each other, but they're reporting at least 21 people killed in field executions by government forces, which is notable, including 12 men in a rest house. It said it did not say how many of the dead were civilians, and also cited reports of members of the security forces looting and setting homes on fire. And this is where the bigger story comes in, right? Armed factions against armed factions is not a good thing. There are a lot of accusations right now that there are elements of the Syrian government right now taking part in some of these atrocities. We've seen some of the humiliation, is probably the best way to put it, of what appear to be government forces shaving the beards and mustaches off of some elderly Druze men and straight abusing civilians. Now, to step back a little bit, Druze is an interesting group of people here. There's around 700,000 Druze in Syria. There's some in Israel as well, kind of generally spread throughout that area. And we are going to see some of the Druze from Israel trying to move, actually jumping the fence and like going into Syria to try to help their fellow people there, which is wild. They're getting picked up by trucks and I guess driven into the fight. They're just in civilian clothes and like they're just jumping in to go protect their brethren, I guess. I don't exactly know how that's supposed to play out. But nonetheless, Druze is like this, not an expert on this, but it's like a mix between Christianity, Islam, very secretive group, kind of inclusive, not necessarily autonomous, but historically when clashes have picked up, we have seen the Druze kind of fortify their own areas and have kind of homegrown militias to protect their people and their belongings. Now turning to Thomas Van Linge, who's a freelance journalist who spent a lot of time focused on Syria. He said right now there's complete chaos in Sweida as government forces have entered the area. Following a deal with some Druze factions, government forces have reached the center of the city, where they've removed a portrait of Druze leader Hikmat al-Hiraji. On the other hand, is the last one to refuse a deal, and he has ordered his men to lay ambushes for the Syrian government forces. The death toll is rising. And this is a report as of just an hour or so ago, so this is pretty recent. He says it should be noted that this campaign by the Syrian government is not directed against the entire Druze community, only against the Sweida Military Council. Other parts of the region are not being attacked because of this and because there's an understanding in place with the local Druze forces there. So we have to be careful when looking at this. As of now, it does not appear there's going to be a lot of efforts, and there might end up being some accuracy in presenting this along very sectarian lines, but it also, according to Van Linge, appears to be focused on specific areas within these Druze communities, not against all Druze in general. Again, though, very fluid, very dynamic. It could spiral into that, no doubt, which is one of the challenges or one of the risks as this fighting continues to escalate. He says, as Israeli strikes have turned the tide in Sweida, government forces have mostly abandoned the city and pulled their forces to the outer perimeter. Meanwhile, the Sweida Military Council seems to have been joined by the Men of Dignity faction. A general mobilization call has gone out all over Syria. So when looking at this is one of those situations where this only serves chaos right now, unfortunately. It's a net negative for just about everyone else. A net negative for the Druze in the sense of what I just mentioned. While it does appear to be the violence focused against just one, maybe a couple of the Druze groups right now, the longer that they are included as one of the two warring factions, you're going to see a lot of other entities start to target Druze in general. That's how we see sectarian violence spread in a lot of conflicts. This isn't good for Syria because they're trying to get on their own 2 feet, and this shows that they do not have control over a certain portion of their country. And of course, if we see, and there's confirmation that Syrian government forces are taking part in atrocities, that reduces a lot of the legitimacy that the new Syrian government has gained in recent months on the international stage. For Israel, it's confusing because on the one hand, they do want to protect the Druze. They say that's what they're doing in southern Syria, but we have to keep in mind that Israel has a lot of other fronts actively engaged during this war. The Iran issue is not yet resolved, and Syria was a place where it seemed like there might be the possibility for Israel and Syria to start new and maybe form a different type of relationship than they've had in recent years. And just to say it bluntly, the bombing of Damascus risks that actually coming to fruition. Now, turning to Al Jazeera, they say sectarian violence in Sweida resumed in full force earlier on Wednesday, despite the announcement of a ceasefire by the Syrian government the previous night. Syria's defense minister told Al Jazeera, they say ministry officials blamed groups outside of the law for breaking the ceasefire and attacking government troops, who they said were responding to fire while taking into account rules of engagement to protect civilians. The Syrian Defense Ministry told Al Jazeera it had opened safe corridors in the city for civilians to flee the violence. And it's not clear at this point where those corridors are, how effective they are, and if the people inside some of these cities are actually utilizing those or if they're planning to stay, fight, and defend their territory. Now, looking at some Syrian state media here, not a lot at this point coming out from official Syrian sources. I do want to note right out the gate that the Syrian president's office put out a note saying that they acknowledge unfortunate violations in Sweida, which it describes as criminal and illegal, saying they strongly condemn these shameful acts and promise an investigation and to hold accountable all of those proven to be involved. Hopefully, again, there's no good scenario there when you're talking about sectarian violence, criminal violence against innocent civilians, and the legitimacy of the Syrian government now. So that statement should be well received. Hopefully, we actually see some follow through in the aftermath. Now, again, Sana, Syrian state media here, they say, quoting the Ministry of the Interior, they say internal security forces, in cooperation with units from the Ministry of Defense, were able to expel the outlaw groups from the center of the city, secure civilians, and restore stability, the ministry said in a statement posted to its Telegram channel. Following the operation, an agreement was taken to establish security checkpoints within the city and withdraw military vehicles and units of defense forces in response to the wishes of the residents and to reinforce the state of calm. So this statement is making it sound very much like the government forces moved in to protect the Druze against some of these armed rogue outlaw groups. They say, however, those understandings were quickly violated as the outlaw armed gangs resumed launching treacherous attacks targeting police and security personnel in an attempt to disrupt the security situation and undermine the local understandings that had been reached. It added that in a dangerous development, Israeli warplanes carried out airstrikes in support of these groups, targeting security and military forces and claiming the lives of several members of the internal security forces and the Syrian army. And before getting into the IDF statements so far and some of the footage of the IDF carrying out airstrikes in Syria, we should start with Israel just killed a bunch of Syrian government forces. I mean, who do you think is in those tanks and the armored personnel carriers and the vehicles moving to or from Sweida? So that's pretty significant. I don't believe we've seen that yet since the new Syrian government came into power a few months ago. Actual engagements between the IDF killing official members of the Syrian armed forces. But Nonetheless, the IDF has put out a lot of information in the last couple days and a lot of videos showing the strikes taking place in southern Syria. Defense Minister Katz put out a statement earlier today saying, quote, "The Syrian regime must leave the Druze and Sweida and withdraw its forces. As we have clarified and warned, Israel will not abandon the Druze in Syria and will enforce the demilitarization policy we have decided on. The IDF will continue to attack regime forces until they withdraw from the area and will soon raise the level of responses against the regime if the message is not understood." And a lot of what we're seeing in terms of the IDF, there's a couple different aspects to the IDF actions right now. A lot of airstrikes against, they're military targets, right? Because they're tanks and armored personnel carriers and rocket launchers. So Israel is targeting military assets of the Syrian government, not of these Bedouin groups or Islamic State or a terrorist organization, but actually of the Syrian government. So we need to keep that in mind. And we're seeing a reinforcement of along the border area that separates Israel and Syria. Again, we've seen a lot of footage just in the last 24 hours of people trying to cross into Syria and then trying to move back into Israel. And it looks like, for the time being, that the Israeli forces along that border may have been overwhelmed and didn't have the resources necessary to lock that area down. Now, the IDF said that on Monday, several tanks were identified advancing towards Sweida. The IDF struck the tanks in order to prevent their arrival in the area. The presence of these assets in southern Syria may pose a threat to the state of Israel. The IDF will not allow the establishment of a military threat in southern Syria and will operate against it. And we're definitely getting a couple different types of statements from Israel. One is they're pointing to the militarization of some of these areas close to their border, and that's kind of what that statement is leaning towards. We will not allow even this new Syrian government to start to put military forces near the Israeli border. On the other hand, we're hearing that this is all about protecting the Druze, or at least that's a priority. They're kind of different objectives depending on what you're going after and where you're striking. So keep that in mind as we kind of dig into this a little bit further. The IDF said following the directive of their political echelon, the IDF began striking military vehicles belonging to the Syrian regime in the area of Sweida. This follows Monday's identification of Syrian regime convoys, including armored personnel carriers and tanks, moving towards the area. Subsequently, IDF struck several armored vehicles consisting of tanks, APCs, armored personnel carriers, and MLRS, multiple launch rocket systems, as well as access roads in order to disrupt the convoy's arrival to the area. They say a short while ago, the IDF struck the entrance of the Syrian regime's military headquarters in the area of Damascus. This was actually caught live on the news. Syria was doing a news broadcast, and what do you know? In the background, the headquarters building got hit there in broad daylight. It looks like Israel went back and hit it again. So it was not just the entrance. That first strike doesn't appear to have done a lot of damage, and could be argued that it was just signaling to the Syrian government, like, hey, we're serious. We can hit you if need be, which I don't think was really up for debate. But to stop sending any forces towards this area in the southern portion of the country, the next wave of strikes looks like it did serious damage to the military headquarters there. Now, the IDF said in accordance with the situational assessment, they have decided to reinforce their forces along the area of the Syrian border. They said a short while ago, IDF identified dozens of suspects attempting to infiltrate Israeli territory from Syria. IDF and Israeli border police are operating to prevent the infiltration. Simultaneously, several Israeli civilians crossed the border fence into Syrian territory in the area of Majd al-Shams. IDF troops are currently operating to safely return the civilians who crossed the border. It does not look like some of those civilians are very interested in coming back to Israel. Again, a lot of the footage we have right now, these appear to be Israeli Druze that are jumping the border or finding ways to cross the border. They're getting picked up inside of Syria, and we don't necessarily know where they're going, but you would assume they're heading towards the area in southern Syria where this fighting is ongoing, especially in and around Sweida. It's not entirely clear if the people that jumped in are now the ones trying to come back out, but there's definitely a bit of a border issue there separating the two countries. Again, this is a very high level, very early assessment of the fighting that's playing out right now. Best case scenario is that it all stops. because the fighting does not really serve any good actors right now. There's nobody that is going to gain the longer this plays out, other than rogue groups that can take advantage of chaos, to put it bluntly. So we'll keep an eye on this situation and do our best to update you as more information comes out. That's all I got for now. Thanks for watching, and I'll see y'all next time.